So let's go ahead and begin today's meeting. For those of you who don't remember me, because it's been quite a minute, my name is Kendrielle Clark. I'm a Public Affairs and Funding Specialist with Stantec, and I will be helping with facilitation for today's meeting. I'm going to pass it off to Matthew Feenup, who is a part of the project coordination team, to start us off with the agenda and roll call before we jump into the presentation.
Thank you, Kendrielle. So I'm Matthew Feenup, part of the Stantec team. And today, our agenda for today, there's not a lot of work to do, as there has been in some of the meetings over the summer, where really our goal today is just to pass on progress that has been made since the last committee. There are some important updates, although not perfectly satisfying updates from the engineering team. There was progress made, but we haven't finalized the deliverables from the engineering team. We want to give you a quick update on the pilot water market launch, which is scheduled. We're hoping to do 2 auctions this December in the Mid-kaweah GSA to test the strategy that this committee has been developing. And then part of that too is providing a timeline to you for completion of the water marketing strategy document and collection of community feedback on that. And so that's basically the outline for what we hope to give you an update on. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to the room at Tulare Irrigation District and allow those people to introduce themselves as part of our roll call. And then we'll invite the folks online to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, it's Aaron Fukuda, GM at Tulare ID and the Mid-kaweah GSA, and there's 8 sandwiches left here if there's anybody that's still hungry.
This is Sophie, and I just finished my last bite, and it was mighty good. Sophie Mulholland. I'm on the advisory council of the 2 of the 3 GSAs in Kaweah, and also the advisory council for Eastern Tule. Glad to be here.
Hello everyone, my name is Diana Zagara and I work at Tulare Irrigation District.
Right, online, at the top of my view is Stacy. Stacy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Stacy Ann Silva with Altum Aqualogic. I serve as a private consultant for landowners in the Kaweah Subbasin. Some landowners.
Craig?
Hi, this is Craig Wallace, General Manager, Lindsay Strathmore Irrigation District, President, which I'm the water company, and I'm on the East Kaweah Technical Committee.
Excellent. Sonia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Sanchez, Manager with Self-Help Enterprises.
Welcome, Sonia. Stephanie?
Stephanie Reese, Program Coordinator, Greater Kaweah GSA.
Excellent. Sean?
This is Sean Corley, Lakeside Irrigation Water District, Greater Kaweah GSA.
Thank you. And James?
James Silva, Greater Kaweah GSA.
Thank you, James. Is there anyone who is attending virtually that I have not asked to introduce themselves? Excellent. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. In terms of recapping our previous meeting, the primary task that we undertook on August 30th was a review of the comments that we received from the committee regarding the water marketing strategy document. The Stantec team assembled those comments into a spreadsheet. You're seeing you might be led to believe, Craig's on, so I can tease Craig. You might be led to believe that Craig was the only person that provided comments, but that just happens to be a sampling error. We're showing you a handful of the comments from one section of the spreadsheet. But all of those comments were tabulated as you see here. And we went through each of those comments received additional comments from committee members and got some great feedback and are now working on making appropriate changes to the various chapters of the strategy document. And so in the PDF of this presentation, which will be posted online following the meeting, you can access the Dropbox folder where you can view those annotated chapters. You can also access the comments spreadsheet as well. And it's never too late to make additional comments. So you can register those by just sending an email to any member of the Stantec team or to anyone, Diana or Aaron at Tulare Irrigation. And we're happy to continue incorporating that feedback. You know, one of the things that was especially helpful last committee meeting was that obviously a lot of the members of this committee and the Stantec team have been really sort of buried in the details, you know, and sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees. And so it's really great to get feedback on the things that we need to explain in more detail or explain in a different way to really capture the work that the committee has been doing, the considerable work. And so we are already working to update that strategy document. Right, so briefly, some engineering team updates. So there's two things that the engineering team has been working on. One is to more clearly define the triggers, which would result in restrictions on transfers of allocation in the version 1.0 water market. Just to remind folks who aren't as familiar, the triggers are one of the primary measures that the committee adopted in order to protect against unintended consequences of transfers, to mitigate adverse impacts to third parties. Third parties might be agricultural pumpers who are not party to a particular transfer. They could also be disadvantaged communities. They could also be environmental resources in the basin. And so in a moment, I'll go into a little more detail about where we are with the triggers. The other one is that the engineering team has been working all year on modifications to the trading zone boundaries. So the trading zones started as analysis zones in the GSPs, and then for various practical reasons had to be modified in order to make them function as trading zones in the form of water market. And I'll give you a little more detail about that in a moment. So in terms of the triggers, again, there's two of them, a minimum threshold trigger and a disadvantaged community trigger. So where a GSA is broken up into different trading zones, there's a representative monitoring point within each trading zone. And we're constantly or not constantly, twice a year, we're monitoring water levels in order to discover any unintended consequences, potential unintended consequences of transfers of pumping. And so the minimum threshold trigger is a water level in the representative monitoring point, below which, if water levels decline, that would result in directional restrictions on trading within that particular trading zone. So if the trigger is pulled, then water users would be allowed to transfer pumping out of the zone, but they will not be allowed to receive transfers of pumping from outside that zone, right? So the idea is to make sure that transfers are not increasing total pumping in that zone and pushing water levels further. And so we had started with a draft definition of the minimum threshold trigger of 12 feet above the minimum threshold. And the idea there was that's approximately 1 year's maximum decline. And so it gave us a protective threshold above the minimum threshold. The engineering team had actually noted that in the case of disadvantaged community trigger, that it was more likely to be 30% of well depth. So we had presented to the committee in a previous meeting that instead of 12 feet, we were going to use 30% of well depth. And since that last meeting, there has been work been doing in the GSAs to do two things. Number one, to actually refine the minimum threshold. So the minimum thresholds are now moving. And as a result of that, it's not yet clear what the appropriate level is for in terms of a protective measure that's above the minimum threshold. And so we can't, it may be 30%, it may be 12 feet, or it may be some different measure. And so we'll report back to this committee at the next meeting when we expect that minimum threshold trigger definition to have settled. Aaron, do you want to comment at all on the process that's happening with minimum thresholds?
Given a little update on that, what we found is that using the 12 is too low. Using a percentage, not necessarily the 30, a 20, a 25, using a percentage is problematic because it doesn't properly address different types of conditions, right? So you can have an area that has very shallow wells, and so that minimum threshold would then be a very small number, or you could be in areas where it's very deep and you're going to have very large numbers. So what we did is the staff at Mid-kaweah and TID did a kind of a survey of professionals, literature, engineering calculations, and we looked at the various ways you could look at that trigger in relation to the GSP and the work we're doing. We call it the protective threshold. It's at a point at a water level in a well, are you going to begin to start having problems? And when it comes to a domestic well, we ran the calculations, we talked to experts, we talked to well drillers, we talked to engineers. The general theme is that 30 feet above the bottom of any well is when you're going to start having problems. So we have begun our analysis on that 30-foot protective level. Again, that is only meant to say when you get a groundwater level about 30 feet from the bottom of a domestic well, you are going to begin to start seeing some issues. So that's where we stand today. The minimum threshold analysis is moving along very nicely. We have now started to evaluate multiple levels below the 2022 levels to see what is significant and unreasonable, and our advisory committees are being asked to provide feedback right now. And so that process should be wrapping up, I would say, in the next 30 days. Then we would have our I would call preliminary minimum threshold approach.
Excellent. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Was the research on that done only for domestic wells in terms of when you start having problems?
Because right now we're looking at the significant and unreasonable being the damages to drinking water and community wells.
Okay, thank you.
That's kind of you're going to take the most impactful, shallowest well as your impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. In terms of no, go ahead, Aaron.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. Somebody's pointing out something that we didn't evaluate the ag well. The ag well would be different. But right now in our mitigation plans, or the way we're looking at minimum threshold establishment, ag wells are not considered part of the evaluation right now. Well, every GSA is doing it a little different. Mid-kaweah has an evaluation process to provide technical support. I think I can speak to the Mid-kaweah. We are not including it right now in our mitigation plans, but we're going to evaluate a future inclusion.
And Aaron, do I understand that if you manage to the protective threshold in the domestic wells, that will be even more conservative than managing the agricultural wells because the domestic wells are shallower?
Correct. However, in certain areas, the domestic wells are getting down to rivaling the ag wells.
Okay.
And I want to be careful that we understand what the protective threshold is. It's that level at which you're going to start seeing impacts. It's not the minimum threshold. It's not a sustainable management criteria, but it's used as a point at which we can start accumulating impacts. And then that establishes for our advisory committee to evaluate, is that significant or unreasonable?
Great.
So.
And the protective threshold is always above the minimum threshold, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
So it's a more conservative threshold.
And that's where we start accumulating impacts to evaluate whether that's significant or unreasonable.
Great. Any follow-up comments, Sophie?
That helps a lot, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, in terms of the disadvantaged community trigger, we're still operating with the same approach. And so this is a reminder of what we've shown you in the past, is that for each disadvantaged community, we'll find the closest unconfined representative monitoring point. We'll then compare water levels in that representative monitoring point to water levels in the disadvantaged community wells. And then we'll set a protective depth so that we can actually measure, we can estimate the impact to disadvantaged communities using the nearest representative monitoring point. Right, so we'll set trigger elevations in the representative monitoring points that correspond to a protective threshold in the disadvantaged community, the neighboring disadvantaged community wells. And so that work is ongoing. And so any comment, Aaron, that you would like to make in this regard?
You know, we're Georgina and the team, we want to get together with Matthew. We're trying to set that up here in the next couple of days because Georgina's got thoughts on it right now, ready to go.
Yeah, great. And then the effort to modify trading boundaries so that they can serve as trading zones within the version 1.0 water market is ongoing as well. As a reminder that what you see here, each of these lines was in many cases a smooth line in the original analysis zones established in the GSPs, right? And that in many cases, you know, that a particular smooth line used to establish an analysis zone might have simply been a line, you know, on on a hydrograph, you know, showing a groundwater contour line, and so in many cases they were smooth lines. That in January or so, the engineering team snapped those original analysis zone lines to the nearest parcel boundary, according to a simple rule which said that if 50.1% of a parcel was on one side of an analysis zone line, that we would move the entire parcel into that analysis zone. And so you see here the irregular lines that produced, right? And now this allows those boundaries to function as trading zone boundaries because we can identify every single parcel with a particular trading zone. So for example, we know exactly which parcels are within trading zone 29 here in the Mid-kaweah GSA. Now there have been some, there is one more round of revisions that's happening based on feedback from stakeholders on the location of those boundaries, and also to ensure very simple things like every single trading zone has a representative monitoring point in it. And I understand that that map is imminent and that we should have those final revisions very, very shortly. And we'll be able to share that with the committee at the next committee meeting. Aaron, anything you want to add here?
Yes, we got a package.
Why don't you go ahead and click on it might have been updated while Gina was trying to get it updated. So
terrific.
Okay. I don't know if she was trying.
Okay, and then I'll need to, I'm gonna stop sharing and I'll reshare the window that's showing in.
Did it change? I can't tell. If it does, it was probably fairly minor.
Okay, great. Okay.
Because I'm looking at that little, we were trying to clean up some of those, see like that little hook in 21.
see, where's the numbers disappear? Where's 21? Oh yeah, 21. Yep.
Well, we're trying to clean up some of those little weird shapes, and then, like, for instance, if you look up in the, so there was some weird stuff that needed to get cleaned up.
Okay, so this must not be cleaned up, correct?
No, she must not have gotten it generated. She had emailed me that she was trying to get it uploaded to ArcView map, which is what theoretically are in. And then we had some, the Greater Kaweah, I believe, as we're revising the GSP, I think they had a need to adjust some of their zones. And so then I think she needed, I bet you that's what she's doing. She's applying the 50% snap rule to the new, right? Because GSP trading zones are contoured not to parcels, they're different. So.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and I notice here this still says draft trading zones January 13th. And so I imagine she'll add that as a new layer, and we'll be able to see that. So I do encourage folks, so in the PDF version of the presentation slides that I'm using, you saw that in the bottom right-hand corner, there was a link. And so this will be updated as additional information is made available. And so I encourage folks, you can use the PDF version to navigate to this map, and you'll then have access to any updates as they are made. And I want to just, first of all, really sort of express my appreciation for the work the engineering team did. This is an amazing tool. This is something that I wish other basins that I've operated in had access to, is something like this, where this information is available to the public. Just to remind you, this not only shows the basin boundary and the GSA boundaries, it also has really important information like the location of census designated disadvantaged communities. It also has historic data on reported dry wells, so that we can actually look for hot spots, where we ought to monitor very carefully for unintended consequences of market transfers. It also shows the representative monitoring points. And so this is really an excellent resource. And I appreciate that it's been continuously updated as we've gone. So please, committee members, spend some, if you haven't recently, feel free to go back to this. Because I think it's an important, it has informed the work that we've been doing and will continue to do so. All right. Are you viewing the screens in full screen mode, or the slides in full screen mode, Aaron and Diana? Okay. Terrific. All right. So one of the next tasks in the original scope of work that we laid out at the very beginning of this process was to conduct a simulation of the market, so that the committee can actually see the rules, operating mechanisms, structures, operating mechanisms at work, and so that we can actually engage in some evaluation of whether or not the market, the version 1.0 of the market, works as the committee intended. And in fact, the final strategy document will have an appendix which reports the results, the summary of market activity and summary of findings from that simulation. And that there will actually be one more round of revisions to the water market rules and other elements of the strategy to reflect what's learned. And so the current plan is to do a test of the market in December of this year in Mid-kaweah GSA. And so the idea here is that we would allow eligible water users in the Mid-kaweah GSA to participate in 2 auctions in December. They would be about 2 weeks apart. And the idea would be that water users would be allowed to offer for transfer unused allocation from the 2022-23 water year that ended on September 30th. And so this is not only a test of the market, it's also fully in keeping with the plan that was originally laid out for the version 1.0 market, which was that water users would have a true up auction after the end of the water year, right? And so the idea here is that in December, we will actually have all of people will have received the reports of their water use and available allocation from in the water accounting dashboard. So that data currently arrives with about a 30-day lag. And so they will actually have the opportunity to see what their year-end water totals are, and then have the opportunity to offer for transfer unused allocation consistent with all of the rules that the committee has laid out. So less than 10 inches per acre, consistent with any restrictions on trade that the triggers impose, etc. And so there'll be 2 auctions in December, just in the Mid-kaweah, and it will be truing up the accounts from the previous water year. So any transfer that happens won't affect 2023-24 allocations. It will only affect the year-end accounts in the 2022-23 water year. And so that's what's currently planned. So the engineering team has already determined that the minimum threshold trigger would not apply. So even as they try and define what the ultimate protective threshold and minimum thresholds will be, we know in Mid-kaweah that water levels are currently above where those thresholds will land. And so it is clear that the minimum threshold trigger would not apply in Mid-kaweah at this time. The engineering team is still working to determine whether the disadvantaged community trigger would apply in any of the trading zones in the Mid-kaweah. And so we expect that determination. That's part of why Aaron's trying to put together a meeting this week or early next with the engineering team to work on that final determination. And so we should be able to say shortly whether either of those triggers would apply for those 2 auctions that are planned as a test of the market in December. One of the important next steps in order to implement that test of the market is for the legal team to provide all of the documents and other administrative actions that are required to implement the test. So again, the test is only planned for this December, and then these auctions would only be authorized for that very narrow period. And then that would be the end of any of those authorizations. But the team is working on to finalize the version 1.0 water market rules based on the comments they received from this committee. So again, there was important feedback on items that need to be clarified to make sure that the rules say exactly what was intended. So that has been passed on to the legal team, and they are working on that finalization. They're also working on a final resolution that Mid-kaweah GSA could use to authorize these 2 auctions in December. And they're also working to finalize the pilot participation agreement in light of the comments that were made by committee members and which we summarized last at the August 30th meeting. So the legal team is working on that. There's one other document the legal team needs to develop, which is an exchange administrator agreement for those auctions. And so that would authorize environmental market specialists to conduct the 2 auctions. Again, that agreement would literally only extend through December and for this one-time test of the market. And so the legal team is working on those documents currently. And so we hope to have those final versions for this committee to share with this committee by the next committee meeting. And in fact, the resolution adopting the pilot, a lot of these documents would need to be presented to the Mid-kaweah GSA board at the November meeting in order to implement those 2 auctions in December. Aaron, anything you want to add at this point to the discussion?
I think you covered it all that we've been dealing with.
Great. Any questions from committee members? All right. And so you'll see in a moment, we'll talk about how the findings from that market test will be incorporated into the strategy document. And that's a good transition to the community feedback process. So we, as I mentioned previously, we're working to update the various chapters of the strategy document. We're approaching the point where we will actually need to first present the final strategy document to this committee, and then present it for public comment. And so I wanted to share with you a quick timeline, and then I'll pass the presentation off to Kendrielle, who will facilitate some discussion of that community feedback process. So our current vision is that in October and November, the Stantec team will revise the current chapters. We are already doing this, but we'll continue to revise the current chapters to respond to the committee feedback that we summarized at the August 30th and collected at the August 30th committee meeting. In December, we would conduct the 2 auctions in Mid-kaweah to test the strategy. And then we would spend January and February, first of all, evaluating the market pilot, summarizing the actual activity, what happened, what worked the way we thought it did, what didn't, collecting feedback from stakeholders who participated about what worked well, what didn't. And then we will make a presentation to this committee that summarizes that pilot activity and those findings, and then solicits feedback from the committee. That committee feedback will be incorporated into a written appendix to the water marketing strategy document that summarizes those findings and then makes concrete recommendations about how the water marketing strategy should be modified in response to what we learned in the test. And all of that would allow us to present a final strategy document to this committee by the end of February, and then be able to post it for public comment again by the end of February. So that's the current timeline that we're imagining. And with that, I'm going to invite Kendrielle to jump in and facilitate discussion about the actual process.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So I'm fairly certain that everyone who's here has either put on a public comment process for something that their agency has done or participated in a public comment process. But before we jump into discussion, I just wanted to bring up these 3 questions I want everybody to use to frame their thinking as we jump into discussion. So starting out with the first one, next slide, Matthew. Why do we need input from the public? Very simple. We want to inform all of the interested parties of what the water marketing strategy is, and building trust with the community means keeping them informed, making sure that they're engaged, which leans into the second point, which is maintaining alignment with the guiding principles. For those of you who don't remember or weren't present during that period of time, our guiding principles are flexibility, adaptability, transparency, doing no harm, maintaining one kaweah subbasin water marketing strategy, and most importantly, equity and inclusion. That particular principle states that the water marketing strategy should be developed using an open process that includes a full range of potential market participants and stakeholders that could be impacted throughout this process and with the final water marketing strategy. We want the implementation of that strategy to be relatively simple and understandable for all stakeholders. And particularly, we want to make sure that the strategy can mitigate market power, the ability of certain participants to limit participation of others. And then finally, on that point, we want to make sure that we're including perspectives from all fronts to make sure that we're developing the most well-rounded document and making sure that it's as accessible and innovative as possible. Next slide. So how do we procure meaningful input from the public? Leaning into that same guiding principle by making sure that we're maintaining equitable engagement practices. That means making sure that we're covering all of the interested parties and stakeholders that are involved, making sure that access to the document is accessible for folks with a wide range of, say, for example, access to internet resources, speakers of languages other than English, and secondly, making sure that we're requesting feedback with specificity. And what I mean by that is while we're trying to make this document, as I said, as accessible as possible, it's still a pretty meaty technical document at points. So making sure that we're very intentional about what we're hoping to get back from the community means that we're being as respectful as possible of their time, and making the process as easy as possible for them, and ensuring that we're getting the most intentional and most specific feedback possible. And having that, having those parameters about what we're asking for will make implementing the comments that we get back so much easier as well. Next slide. And then finally, how will we incorporate that feedback into the strategy document? We'll want to make sure that we used an organized comment management system. We've already used one for cataloging and integrating all of the comments that you all have provided us thus far. If the committee thinks that this is an appropriate strategy and format for cataloging all of the comments from the public, then we can continue on with that. Or if there's any other suggestions that folks have, we are open to whatever system you think makes sense. Once we have all of those comments cataloged, we'll of course split them up into substantive and editorial categories. Editorial means the way the document is written, the format, the grammar, the punctuation, etc., versus substantive, which gets into the accuracy, the technicality, and the data of the document. And what we'll want the committee's feedback on is all of the substantive comments. How applicable are they? Does it change anything at the core of the document? How should we approach that comment, and how should we respond to incorporate it? And going into the last slide, which is where we will be jumping into discussion, we have 4 questions that we'd like to run through with you, starting with what does the format of a successful public comment process look like? Again, I know a lot of you have either put on public comment processes or participated in some, so feel free to unmute yourself or pop some comments in the chat and let us know what you think makes sense for this document. How should we be running it alongside you and then alongside the public? Don't all unmute at once. If we don't have any takers, I can start out with some suggestions. Some common public comment processes that I've seen over the last few years are written comment processes where folks have the option to email in, mail in, or either via a web form of sorts, submit a comment on specific aspects of a document or the document as a whole. Depending on which way we go with that, that would require a little bit of additional effort to make sure that everything's cataloged and put into one place because it'd be coming from multiple locations. We could potentially have a public meeting and have people give verbal comments or written comments in person. And I see I finally got some biters. I think I saw Stacy's comments first, so I'll read those. A structured overview of the program before comment as part of an open public meeting where verbal comment is accepted. Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. And I see Sonia, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think following the model that the Mid-kaweah GSA took for obtaining comments and giving updates on the mitigation plan should be followed. I think that was very successful. The meeting was held in a disadvantaged community and there was very meaningful and thoughtful outreach done to inform of that meeting. So I think that is the model to follow here. And I think it needs to be more than one meeting, to be honest. The Kaweah Subbasin, it covers a wide area, a large area, and there needs to be multiple meetings. Again, following that model, meetings in disadvantaged communities within the GSA, with GSAs, at least one, but maybe that might require more. And maybe, having a virtual, more general public meeting. But I think being mindful of going to disadvantaged communities, and following that model that the Mid-kaweah GSA took would be very helpful for this effort.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sonia. For those of you who were at our public workshop, believe it was in May, we did a full presentation of the water marketing strategy's purpose and the work that had been conducted thus far. For anyone that was there, do you think a presentation of that depth would be beneficial, or something a little bit more truncated and straight to the more recent facts?
I think that you would want to replay everything that you did from then, because I think that a lot of people are barely hearing about this. And I think that definitely giving them the big picture so that they can understand before the public comment processes.
Right. For those who are familiar with the type of attendance that come to these more successful meetings, are there particular times or locations that you've noticed the public prefers more than others?
I know that if you include breakfast or coffee in the mornings, definitely gets people that more excited about being somewhere.
I think we need
there's
to
also.
Oh, I'll
Go ahead.
hold.
I was just going to say, I think there's also some benefit to holding them in the evenings, as a lot of the participants will work during the day.
100% echo that. I think we need to think about different audiences, and that's why I think more than one meeting is needed. For residents, if we want to meaningfully engage them and hold this at a time that they'll be available to attend, it would definitely need to be the evening.
Also think that if you can make it as close to after work as possible, it's better, because if people get home, then they don't want to come back out. So I've had a lot of success when I'm trying to reach people by starting it at like 5.
All great suggestions and all common best practices. Thank y'all. I'm glad to seeing that they're working within the region.
Would you guys be open to a combination of what I found is that if we offer, let's just say, consistently evening meetings, sometimes that's actually hard for people, right? Because they're going to get home with their families and such. If we do a combination of that, would the committee be open to that? Like maybe one in the morning so that we can catch anybody that might be available, and then 1 or 2 in the evenings.
I think that's a very good approach.
Aaron, I'll show up no matter when you hold it, so I'll just nod.
We'll just make sure we get we did an event with crumble cookies, which was a big hit, but that was very expensive. So
What if I told you I was coming? Would it still be expensive?
yes, we would get the crumble cookies for Candriel.
Haha. Okay. Second question. Because this is an action that was born out of SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management. I don't know why I felt the need to define that term, like everyone on this phone didn't know what it was, but the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Are there any particular uses or users of groundwater that we need to be paying attention to here? I know that's a bit of a redundant question, but I want to make sure we're covering all our bases. I want to make sure there's no gaps in what we do here.
I sit on the coordinated committee that CAP, they have caucus groups, and it's been really effective because the caucuses really represent most of the people that are affected by SGMA. And those caucuses are ag, environmental, agency, disadvantaged communities, and government.
Mm. As
I could
far
get you,
as, sorry, go ahead.
I could get you the information on why they're included as participants in any plan going forward for signature.
And Sophie,
Yeah,
are there
absolutely.
standing caucus representatives that we can leverage to get?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think the issue with that is, I think what some people we're trying to do is get the representatives within the Kaweah Subbasin, and I think that one way we could do that effectively is to reach out to the 3 GSA rural stakeholder committees and the tax, so that they have a standing invitation to come to anything and everything, because theoretically, like the Mid-kaweahs, they're meant to represent the various, like Sophie pointed out, the caucuses of the groundwater users, right? Environmental, disadvantaged community, urban, ag. There's at large, meaning everything. So I think that would be Kendra, I think we want to make sure we extend that invitation to the advisory committee members of each GSA.
Yeah, and I
Agreed.
think that would be for you, Matt, in the rural communities and the stakeholders meeting that we have this month, for you just to make sure to include everybody in that welcome for our members.
Great. Okay, great.
Okay. Next question. Obviously, there is a wide breadth of interested parties groups that we want to get in contact with and make sure we get the document in front of them. But it's going to be a massive effort to coordinate that. So to help make sure that we aren't missing anybody, that we're reaching as many people as possible, what suggestions do you all have for community organizations and nonprofits, CBOs, community groups, places that folks congregate, like churches or down to even coffee shops, community leaders, things of that nature? Who and what should we be reaching out to get the word out about the strategy document and even sending out copies directly to folks?
I think the place to start here has to be the GSA's interested parties list.
Yeah, and I think as long as you have a flyer or a URL for us to copy paste into
Yeah, I
a
would say
newsletter.
self-help enterprises can support, but honestly, these types of efforts take a lot of time. So I would say we can share where flyers can be posted, places that we recommend that, there's already existing community meetings, but I don't think we can commit to being the org to present at these spaces. Again, just because it does take a lot of time, and we're limited on funding, unfortunately, for Sigma efforts. So we're happy to share some recommendations. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that we can share in terms of recommendations and other orgs and community organizations and things like that. But we can commit to sharing those, but not commit to doing the actual outreach work.
Absolutely. I think more so what we're looking for here is a list of organizations and people that we can send, as mentioned, a flyer to with the dates of the public meetings and linked to the document. Here's the document for you to download and review. We'll be meeting on this day, and this day, to give overviews of the water marketing strategy and take public comment on what you've reviewed. In my experience, yes, absolutely interested parties database, but also the listservs of different organizations like industry associations that have large listservs of community members and municipalities, community organizations, community spaces where we can just post a flyer, having all of, bless you.
Sorry.
It's okay. Having all of those folks identified and sending them a direct link to all of those things and asking that they share them with their listservs and their constituents, posting them in their offices, places where we know people are going to frequent. Just, it's basically multiplying ourselves. It's us doing the work, but using the resources of folks who also want to be involved.
Erin,
Yeah, I
I'm
would
not
say
sure.
or sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not sure how other members of the committee feel about this, but it may be worth posting a flyer at like 9-Iron, the golf course, Tulare Golf Course's restaurant, where a lot of the potential market participants, conduct business and meet often.
Great suggestion, Stacy. Thank you.
Yeah,
Isn't
we
it
put
funny
a
where
list.
business gets done?
I've signed more contracts in that restaurant than I'd like to admit.
I think a lot of this is already existing. Like I know Erin, maybe you could share, or Diana maybe share the outreach document that was put together for that mitigation public meeting. I think that is very appropriate here. And I would also check with the other GSAs. I mean, they should have this information already too, like in terms of doing outreach to communities. I would recommend that you also check with them to see what they already have existing that can be shared for this effort.
Great suggestion, Sonia.
Yeah, she's right. We've got a list for you. We can get it to you, and it worked really well.
Was that list, sorry, I guess the more appropriate phrase, is that list expanded to all of the GSAs or just MKGSA?
Might be Mid-kaweah GSA, but I believe that self-help has helped all of us out with that sort of outreach. So we'll combine something and get you it.
Awesome. Okay. And then my last question for the group, what outreach resources do you all have access to help promote the public comment process? You already covered interested parties databases. So I'll be reaching out to all of the GSAs to either give me their database or I pass it along to send it out themselves. Would it be within the realm of possibility that we can have this posted on GSA websites, maybe city websites?
I don't know about city websites, but I know that the Farm Bureau, if you ask them nicely, they may. They have letters that they put things on. In the past they've done the multi-benefit land repurposing program flyer.
Agreed. They also have a newsletter they send out every Friday, I believe. I've worked with them in the Tracy and Eastern San Joaquin subbasins to promote public meetings, and they'll include the flyer in their e-newsletter. So that's definitely another avenue. What about the Ag Commissioner? Do we know if they have a robust list of readers they may give us access to or send out to on our behalf?
Not that I know of, but I could ask if they have a newsletter or a little news for the week or meeting email list.
Okay.
Another one might be UCANR, because they have all of the advisors to ag and they'll have some input probably to community members that we might not have.
Great. I had one more suggestion. What was it? It'll come back to me in the middle of the night.
I do recommend reaching out to like cities to cities and see if they could post it on their city Facebook page. That has also been successful. Like the city of Visalia has a Facebook page, and they posted about that mitigation public workshop. That was really great. Another out of the box idea is posting it like on the Nextdoor app. People are very active on that app here. So that's another space that can be leveraged to share like the future workshops.
Great, thank you, Sonia. Okay,
Andrew, one thing I
yes.
wanted to, Sonia and I think Jan from Community Water Center, a couple other people helped us at Mid-kaweah when we were doing our mitigation webinar. They gave us a list of where to go, like churches and things like that. So I know for Mid-kaweah, we could just do that again, post flyers of that there's going to be one or multiple meetings, but this being a Kaweah Subbasin larger realm, doing in-person flyers may need to leverage some help from the other GSAs. So I could ask Stephanie and Chris if they'd be willing to do that. It took a day, an entire day, so.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Diana. That spurred an idea. I remembered my suggestions. Something else that's been successful for us in other subbasins are reclamation districts. Do we have any direct contacts with those districts here? Hearing no one, I can do some sleuthing for myself and see and get back to the group. And finally, as a thought, how active are the school districts in the area with water resources in general? Is there anybody that sits on like local school boards that keeps tabs on what's happening with Sigma that we may want to loop in? Not specifically for the school board to participate in the strategy, but to get through to parents, I mean, as a window.
You could send an email to the VUSD and the Tulare, I'm not sure what it is. I know the person at VUSD. I don't know who's doing the Tulare schools and then the outer eastern side schools. But I'm sure if you email them, they could send information to staff and staff can send it to other staff or put it on their websites or parent emailing lists. One of the things we did for the well mitigation workshop was I went to the schools with a flyer and I said, would you mind scanning this and giving it to the kids to put in their take home papers? And some said yes and no.
That was the exact thought that I had earlier. Thank you, Diana, for confirming that I'm not crazy and it's a great idea.
It may be worth reaching out, putting on your list, Sundale Unified School District. They're not part of Tulare Union School District, or excuse me, the Tulare school districts. But again, if you're looking for market participants, a lot of your market participants are going to have their kids at Sundale.
Good to know.
And I have some connections there if you need help. My sister's kids still go to school there.
Absolutely. I'll definitely be tapping you for that. Okay. That covers all of the community feedback questions that I had for folks. Is there anything that we should be thinking about that I haven't brought up today? Okay. Well, that is the end of our meeting today. So it looks like we're going to be able to give you a whole hour and a half of your life back.